Hey there, fellow friends and mixers. This is Jay Shlomo at Come Mix Time, and today I want to show you how to use send return processing to shape your bass tone. So let's get started. Before we start, I highly recommend watching the previous episodes or my full setup rundown, all linked in the description. And if you find any of this useful, please consider hitting the like button. So far in this series, we've taken a detailed look at my two-bus processing, the ABCD substereos, and my approach to adding depth and glue with 3 reverbs and parallel buses. Let's compare the raw tracks to what we have already achieved.
You're acting like you don't know, but you've been here before. Be careful what you say, just might become your very last words. You cannot leave me up here all alone in the desert. Just can't take it anymore. Bust a pussycat, kill, move for thrills. Stay, you're acting crazy. Come on, baby. Bust a pussycat, kill, dreams come true fulfilled. Say you're acting crazy. Come on, baby.
The track just went from flat to exciting, yet all we did was routing. So far, the bass, along with drums and percussion, is going straight to B, which is for the rhythm section. With the processing on B as well as through the parallels, the bass has already gained more impact and character. So let's see what we can do to enhance this further. The bass is first routed to this bus called bass float, and this, very important, is routed nowhere. You see, up here it says no bus in German. Instead I use sends to these tracks here, which are called bass body and neck. I just copied these terms from Michael Brauer because I like how they refer to the bass in a musical way rather than calling them just high and low. Let's listen to bass neck first. So this is not just the high mid-range of the bass, it's almost a complete bass sound without the really low bottom end, and it makes sure all the notes cut through. I'm using the Brainworks SSL for these because I had been using it for years, and trying to copy my settings to the SSL 4KE when it came out just didn't really work. I'm high-pass filtering just the bottom octave out, attenuate it a bit with the shelf, and boost the areas of the mid-range I like on bass guitars. Then the EQ'd signal goes into my Yuri 1176 blackface. Nice, the fast attack keeps the mid-range tight and also adds a lot of harmonic character. On the bass body, I used the same Brainworks SSL EQ. Again, I don't want this to be just subby low and rumble. The EQ instead is set to give a nice round representation of the fundamental bass tone. The compressor I'm using on the bass body plays a huge role in shaping the tone. To me, it almost seems a little funny. I'm using the tiniest piece of gear I own for the biggest low end in the mix. But this quirky Golden Age Com Junior is just perfect in this spot. It's supposed to mimic an LA3A, and while it does have some similarities, to me it's completely its own thing. The key is the sidechain high-pass filter, which keeps the very lows out of the compression and has a very unique shape on this compressor. Combined with the fastest attack and release setting, it not only tightens the low end, but gives it an almost rhythmic knock and a very punchy quality.
Acting like you don't know, but you've been here before. Be careful what you say, just might become your very last words. You cannot leave me up here all alone in the desert. Just can't take it anymore. Bust
Having the two different aspects of the bass returning on separate faders has huge advantages. First, it's easy to dial in a great tone quickly. If a bass has lots of low end to start with, for example, I will keep the body lower and vice versa. These are my default fader positions, but I will usually start by making sure they hit about the same on the meter and then roughly match their combined level to that of the bass track. Then I will drop the body and raise it back in until I hear the amount of low end adding to the neck I want in the context of the mix. Let's do that now. To me, this works great, and if you wonder, yes, I likely will EQ on the bass track later. And no, generally I don't touch these EQs. I tuned them over years to work really well together. But if I feel this processing doesn't work on a particular bass or song, which can happen, I rather don't use this approach at all and just revert back to the bass track going straight to B. There is some processing on the bass float as well. First is this amazing surfer EQ. You select a frequency range and then the EQ just magically follows the bass and only boosts the actual notes being played.
Acting like you don't know, but you've been here before. Be careful what you say, just might become your very last words. You cannot leave me up here all alone in the desert. Just can't take it anymore. Bust a pussycat, kill, move for thrill. Stay, you're acting crazy. Come on, baby. Bust a pussycat, kill, dream come true fulfilled. Say you're acting crazy. Come on, baby.
Amazing, right? This boogie edition of the Surfer EQ came free with a subscription at some point and only lets you put one band into surf mode. The full version features more bands which all can surf, but frankly, I like being limited because I have to make a decision on which part of the spectrum really needs to be featured. Sometimes it's the lowest octave, sometimes it's between 100 and 300 Hz, but most of the time, to me, the magic is somewhere in the mid-range. And if I really need two surfer bands, I can just add another instance. Keep in mind that this will be going to both the body and neck. The other thing I do is this zero latency version of the Galfos, just making sure the bass always remains clear.
Acting like you don't know, but you've been here before. Be careful what you say, just might become your very last words. You cannot leave me up here all alone in the desert. Just can't take it anymore. Bust a pussycat, kill, move for thrill. Stay, you're acting crazy. Come on, baby. Bust a pussycat, kill, dream come true fulfilled. Say you're acting crazy. Come on, baby.
If you're using this technique, no matter if with hardware or plugins, make sure your bass and neck tracks are phase coherent. Using the very same EQ plugin helps, but of course you could prefer, say, a Pultec for the body and an API for the neck. In my experience, it's good practice to just have the very same signal path on both tracks and just keeping the unused plugins on each track in bypass. With many DAWs and plugin manufacturers, this will make for a better automatic delay compensation and, most importantly, make sure you actually add body when you raise this fader. So make sure your ears are very aware to this. The last thing we need to talk about is routing. You see, I'm starting with just the neck going to B and the body going straight to the unprocessed stereo, which collects everything before the final tubas. Let's listen.
Bust a pussycat, kill, move for thrill. Stay, you're acting crazy.
course, it all depends on the actual recording, but when listening to Be Alone, you can hear how on this track the body interferes with the impact of the kick drum. And by sending it to the stereo instead, both can bloom more freely. Lesson learned, make use of the different routing options. Now, another great thing about this approach and having the bass on two faders is that you can automate them. Keeping the body low or muted in a verse and then raise it in the chorus can have a significant impact. I also like sending only the neck to a Dimension D-style chorus. That way, the bass gains a little more width and excitement, but the low end stays focused and clean.
Acting like you don't know, but you've been here before. Be careful what you say, just might become your very last words. You cannot leave me up here all alone in the desert. Just can't take it anymore. Bust a pussycat, kill, move for thrill. Stay, you're acting crazy. Come on, baby. Bust a pussycat, kill, dream come true, fulfilled. Say you're acting crazy. Come on, baby.
While this song isn't one where I'd go crazy with the chorus or even use it at all, I hope you can hear why it's a great way to shape and enhance your bass tone. For example, I can always decide whether I send my bass track to my Cybertron tube preamp for distortion or just the neck, the body, or both. So with the bass in good shape, the only thing still left untouched now is the lead vocal, and how to shape it with a similar send return compression technique we'll explore in the next episode. Until then, happy mixing and see you next time.